Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Lord's Day Holy Reading time. We're glad you could be with us, and we're ready to get started.
All right, thank you, and welcome everybody. Good to be here on another beautiful Central Texas day, Lord's Day, and we're thankful to be here and to continue on in John Fox's book, Time and the End of Time, and now in Discourse 2, Considering Our Latter End, and we're in chapter 7, and have which is titled Consider Your Latter End. And we're on point 2 out of 9, that at your latter end all things in this world will fail you and take their leave of you forever. And it occurred to me this week that on a subject like this, and on many subjects of readings, there's a sameness about all the points, but there's shades, different shades of the points being the whole aspect of considering your latter end, considering eternity. There's different shades in each point, so I pray that we don't get bored, and it's kind of like hearing the same thing over and over again, but the Lord will speak to us in these different shades. And it occurred to me that two ways this subject can be profitable and edifying as Christians. The oft contemplation of this subject can help keep us grounded. It's by no means the only way or the best way to keep us grounded in our faith and in reality, but it certainly can do that. I don't ever get bored of considering eternity and our latter end. And then for the lost, you don't know Christ, a subject like this can initiate that initial terror like fear of God that he uses to initially bring people to their senses about their condition without him. And so we have some very good commentary today that we'll get to, and we'll get to this second point now by John Fox, that at your latter end all things in this world will fail you and take their leave of you forever. He says, all your natural endowments, outward enjoyments, parts, parentage, birth, breeding, and this one I liked, wit, wealth, crowns, kingdoms, houses, lands, wives, husbands, children, friends. When your breath is gone, all these are gone. Riches are not forever, neither does a crown endure to all generations. He notes Proverbs 27:24, for riches or strength are not forever, and doth the crown endure to every generation? The glittering sun of all outward glory, the glittering of all outward glory will certainly set, which your own experience and scriptural evidence do clearly evince to all of us. Riches have wings and fly away, Proverbs 23:5. Wilt thou set thy eyes upon that which is not? For riches certainly make themselves wings. They fly away as an eagle toward heaven. I looked at the word eyes and the word make in Strong's Concordance, and I'm glad I did. Sometimes it's very illuminating to look at these things. So I'll read again. Wilt thou set thy eyes, which Strong's, in dissecting that word further, says mental and spiritual faculties, or spring and fountain. So wilt thou set thy mental and spiritual faculties, or your spring or fountain, upon that which is not? And then for riches certainly make themselves wings. You can say, for riches certainly appoint ordain or institute themselves wings. It's certainty. There's a certainty there. Again, they fly away as an eagle toward heaven. The fashion of this world passes away. He cites 1 Corinthians 7, verses 29 through 31, which says, "But this I say, brethren, the time is short. It remaineth, that both they that have wives be as though they had none, and they that weep as though they wept not, and they that rejoice as though they rejoiced not, and they that buy as though they possess not, and they that use this world as not abusing it. For the fashion of this world passeth away." We brought nothing into this world, says John Fox, and it is certain we will carry nothing out. Actually, again, this is citing 1 Timothy 6, verse 7. He cites the whole verse there. We brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we will carry nothing out. 1 Timothy 6, verse 7. If a man were possessed of as much of this world as Solomon, the great king of Jerusalem, who had great magnificent buildings, fruitful pleasant vineyards, gardens, orchards, trees of all manner of fruits, variety of servants, possession of great and small cattle, heaps of gold and silver, peculiar treasures, gifts of kings, instruments, men and women singers, and whatever his eyes desired. Yet when he, this other man, takes a serious view of all things, he would say with Solomon, quote, "All is vanity, and that a man has no profit of all his labor, which he takes under the sun, which made the wise man even to hate life." He cites Ecclesiastes 2, which at the end today, I will read that chapter, and then we have a really good commentary from a man named Robert Buchanan, and I'll tell you a little bit about him. And it's very long. I had to condense it highly, but there's still a lot there. So it'll elaborate on the vanity of it. All is vanity. There's a lot more to it than just all is vanity. So moving on, John Fox says, "Since the fall, there is a curse on the creature, which indeed is deceiving, vexing, decaying, and all outward comforts may be compared to Pharaoh's host, who are alive 1 hour and the next drowned and dead on the seashore." So again, that's exactly like that. "And though you judge, they will endure forever." Psalm 49, verse 11. "Their inward thought is that their houses shall continue forever, and their dwelling places to all generations. They call their lands after their own names." So the inward thoughts of men are deceived in self-deception. So they will deal by you as Absalom's mule that left him in the greatest extremity. 2 Samuel 18, verse 9. Very familiar through Absalom's vanity and pride. Absalom met the servants of David, and Absalom rode upon a mule, and the mule went under the thick boughs of a great oak, and his head caught hold of the oak, and he was taken up between the heaven and the earth, and the mule that was under him went away. If you ever have a chance to study that further, it's very interesting, but I decided just to leave that alone. There's only so much time. But what woeful miseries, John Fox says, attend worldly riches in the getting, keeping, and parting with them. They are snares and thorns, plagues and scorpions to many. Not all, if they don't love their money. They pierce them through with many sorrows. 1 Timothy 6, verse 10, which we have 3 commentaries on that verse. It just kind of as the week went on, I found that it was interesting to look at that verse in depth with some commentaries on it from John Calvin and a couple of others. So anyway, we'll do that next after I read the verse. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. A very familiar verse. And first, have Matthew Henry. He doesn't really get into dissecting that verse too much, but then we have a fellow from the past, Patrick Fairbairn, Fairbairn. He was from the Free Church of Scotland, a Presbyterian. He lived from 1805 to 1874. And then we have John Calvin. We'll kind of contrast those two, because Calvin dissects into the word, the root. The money is the root of all evil. But first, Matthew Henry says, it is good for us to consider the mischievousness of worldly fleshly lusts. They are foolish, and therefore we should be ashamed of them. Hurtful, and therefore we should be afraid of them, especially considering to what degree they are hurtful, for they drown men in destruction and perdition. So he says the apostle affirms that the love of money is the root of all evil. 1 Timothy 6:10. What sins will not men be drawn to by the love of money? Particularly this is at the bottom of the apostasy of many from the faith of Christ. While they coveted money, they erred from the faith. They quitted their Christianity and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Observe, 1, what is the root of all evil? The love of money. People may have money and yet not love it. If they love it inordinately, it will push them on to all evil. 2, covetous persons will quit the faith, if that be the way to get money, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith. As in Demas hath forsaken me, having loved this present world, 2 Timothy 4, verse 10. For the world was dearer to him than Christianity. Observe, those that err from the faith pierce themselves with many sorrows. Those that err from God do but treasure up sorrows for themselves. And then his second point here is an example of Paul exhorting Timothy, a man whose name graces 2 books of the Bible. He's exhorting him here to a holy, godly walk, to a taking heed of falling into sin via a wholehearted following of that which is good, which is the how Matthew Henry quotes it, which is namely Christ. I put that part in because there's only one good, and that is Christ. So Matthew Henry finishes here with, hence he takes occasion to caution Timothy and to counsel him to keep in the way of God and his duty, and particularly to fulfill the trust reposed in him as a minister. He addresses himself to him, Paul does, to Timothy as a man of God. Ministers are men of God and ought to conduct themselves accordingly in everything. They are men employed for God, devoted to his honor more immediately. The prophets under the Old Testament were called men of God. Number 1, he charges Timothy to take heed of the love of money. He'd seen others fall in that so much recently, which had been so pernicious to many. Flee these things. It ill becomes any men, but especially men of God, to set their hearts upon the things of this world. Men of God should be taken up with the things of God. Number 2, to arm him against the love of the world, he directs him to follow that which is good, Christ. Follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, meekness. Righteousness in his conversation towards men, godliness towards God, faith and love as living principles, to support him and carry him on in his preaching and the practice, both of righteousness and godliness. So next is the contrasting some definitions here and some insight. It's not extremely important, but I think just focusing on it a little bit will explain some of the viewpoints on this verse. So that, again, this is Patrick Fairbairn, Presbyterian Free Church of Scotland minister in the 1800s. He says, "For a root of all evils is the love of money," or simply root of all evils. Putting it in the latter way, the exact counterpart of the original, which also gives prominence to the term root, as the apostle undoubtedly meant, we might evade the question whether, if an article, and looking at that more particularly means, I think under Webster's 1828 dictionary, what he's talking about is a point of faith, a doctrinal point, or a proposition in theology. So if that were employed, an article, it should be indefinite. It is certainly more in accordance with English idiom. Idiom is a mode of expression peculiar to a nation or language. In such a passage, to use an article, and if one is used, then I think with Middleton, Huther, Conybeare, and Ellicott against Alford, who was against that, the thought of these guys and Fairbairn, that the indefinite is the fittest. A root of all evils is, etc., or the love of money is a root of all evils. Again, these are opinions, and you check all these things out against Scripture yourself. No doubt the definite article might also be employed. So he's saying you can say the love of money is the root of all evil. There's nothing else you can say about it. As Alford contends, for the purpose of emphasizing root, designating avarice as such a vicious passion that if it stood alone, all manner of evils might spring out of it, as we talked about. But on the other hand, the expression so put is ambiguous, for it may also mean that it is the one thing which is so prolific of evil, there is no other of which the same could be predicated. And that is not the case, he says, for it might be said of ambition and pride and some other passions as well. The question is not, therefore, as Alfred seems to consider, whether one might not here, as in other cases, use the definite article in English, where there is none in the Greek, in order to bring out the proper emphasis. One may well enough do so, as in the passage referred to by him, 1 Corinthians 11, verse 3, which talks about God over man. Man is subject to God, the wife is subject to the husband, the children is subject to the parents. Whereas there is but properly one thing of the kind to be thought of, it can occasion no ambiguity. But where the reverse is the case, as in the present instance, it is better to avoid it by employing the indefinite article, in his opinion, even though it should be with a partial sacrifice of the emphasis, what Paul is saying. So the sentiment is, to sum it up, that there is no kind of evil to which the love of money may not lead men when it once fairly takes hold of them. And the apostle further characterized the affection by saying, which some, reaching after, have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. There is a certain looseness in the structure of the passage, since avarice, or the love of money, and he has in parentheses a Greek word, being itself an affection of the mind, a lust, one cannot strictly be said to reach or long after it. The passion is obviously identified by the apostle with its object, money, as a thing loved and sought after. Some, he says, reaching forth in their desires after that, made a twofold shipwreck. First, of their Christian principles, departing from the faith, and second, of their happiness, piercing themselves through with many sorrows. What precisely these were, we are left to infer, but in his opinion, the expression seems to point to inward rather than to outward troubles, to sorrows of heart, the pungent rebukes of conscience, which came upon the individuals referred to when they saw and had time to reflect on the shameful course they had pursued. And finishing up, John Calvin says on this verse, 1 Timothy 6:10, "For the root of all evils is avarice. There is no necessity for being too scrupulous in comparing other vices with this. It is certain that ambition and pride often produce worse fruits than covetousness does, and yet ambition does not proceed from covetousness. The same thing may be said of the sins forbidden by the seventh commandment. But Paul's intention was not to include under covetousness every kind of vices that can be named. What then? He simply meant that innumerable evils arise from it, just as we are in the habit of saying when we speak of discord or gluttony or drunkenness or any other vice of that kind, that there is no evil which it does not produce. And indeed, we may most truly affirm as to the base desire of gain or avarice, that there is no kind of evil that is not copiously produced by it every day, such as frauds, innumerable falsehoods, perjury, cheating, robbery, cruelty, corruption, injudicature, quarrels, hatred, poisoning, in short, almost every sort of crime. Statements of this nature occur everywhere in heathen writers, and therefore it is improper that those persons who would applaud Horace when speaking in that manner should complain of Paul as having used extravagant language. I wish it were not proved by daily experience that this is a plain description of facts as they really are, but let us remember that the same crimes which spring from avarice may also arise, as they undoubtedly do, either from ambition or from envy or from other sinful dispositions. Finally, which some eagerly desiring, he lists a Greek word, that is overtrained when the apostle says that avarice is eagerly desired, but it does not obscure the sense. He affirms that the most aggravated of all evils springs from avarice, revolting from the faith. For they who are diseased with this disease are found to degenerate gradually till they entirely renounce faith. Hence those sorrows which he mentions, by which term I understand, Calvin says, frightful torments of conscience, so there's an agreement there, which are wont to befall men past all hope, though God has other methods of trying covetous men by making them their own tormentors. So we'll move on from 1 Timothy 6:10. John Fox says, yet here in this world, men toil, beat their brains, weary their bodies, try their spirits, break their sleep, perplex their thoughts, rack their consciences, engulf and drown themselves in cares, endanger their souls, dreaming of nothing but perpetuity. And when they have done all, like the silkworm, they die. Indeed, many a man survives his own happiness. And what he's talking about here is what men enjoy doing the most while they're still able to, physically, mentally. So as you age, there are some that they're still alive and they can't do what they used to do and what they enjoyed the most. So again, he says, indeed, many a man survives his own happiness, like whatever his vocation was, and if that was his life, which perishes before he perishes.
Oh, I see.
And it is the worst of miseries to outlive our own happiness. Therefore, let not riches heighten your hearts and prompt you to pride, which is too common. This day, the rich worldling sang a requiem to his sadly deluded soul, concluding he had much laid up. The night is required. Luke 12, 16 through 21. Familiar. 12, 16 through 21. And he spake a parable unto them, saying, the ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do? Because I have no room where to bestow my fruits. And he said, this will I do. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there will I bestow all my fruits and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Eat, drink, and be merry. But God said unto him, Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? So is he that layeth up treasure for himself, and is not rich toward God. Haman is today the second man in the kingdom, but soon lost all and his life too. Now does Nebuchadnezzar walk in his stately royal palace of Babel, priding himself in his outward pomp. But while the word was in his mouth, a voice came from heaven, saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee. And that's basically the gist of the, I was going to read that, but it's Daniel 4:29 through 31. Jerusalem this year is the princess among the provinces, the next year made tributary, and they that lived delicately are desolate. Lamentations 1, verses 4 and 5. So talking of Jerusalem, the ways of Zion do mourn, because none come to the solemn feasts. All her gates are desolate. Her priests die, her virgins are afflicted, and she is in bitterness. Her adversaries are the chief. Her enemies prosper, for the Lord hath afflicted her for the multitude of her transgressions. Her children are gone into captivity before the enemy. Yesterday, Job's cattle might be numbered by thousands, and tomorrow he is stripped of all and left naked. Neither, says John Fox, is our age time without a sad and dreadful instance, namely, London, on the Lord's day standing, and by Wednesday burned, and laid in ashes, and thousands of her inhabitants houseless and laborless. Therefore, if riches increase, set not your hearts on them. They are uncertain, cannot satisfy, cannot profit, will perish, and that forever. Oh then, let those precious, dear, everlasting jewels, and I inserted spiritual there because I think that's what he means. I could be wrong. So, oh then, let those precious, dear, everlasting spiritual jewels laid up in your moldering, decaying, dying bodies be cared for. Pretty sure that's what he means. What can it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his own soul? That's kind of a good exclamation point. Matthew 16:26, very familiar. For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole soul, or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? And this is the only other one I looked in Strong's Concordance under the word world. It's very interesting. I'd never seen Strong's just write something out definitely, just not just a word, words that can be related to it. So I'll read that again. There's two of them on the word world. For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world? The first one is the whole circle of earthly goods, endowments, riches, advantages, pleasures, etc., which, although hollow and frail and fleeting, stir desire, seduce from God, and are obstacles to the cause of Christ. And again, for what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world? Which the second one is the ungodly multitude, the whole mass of men alienated from God and therefore hostile to the cause of Christ. So you gain, what's that worth gaining? Either one of those. So that's the end of the book part, and we'll get to the Ecclesiastes 2. Chapter 2. I said, go to now, I will prove thee with mirth. Therefore enjoy pleasure, and behold, this is also vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of mirth, what doeth it? I sought in mine heart to give myself unto wine, yet acquainting my heart with wisdom, and to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was that good for the sons of men, which they should do under the heaven all the days. I made me great works, I builded me houses, I planted me vineyards, I made me gardens and orchards, and I planted trees in them, all kinds of fruits. I made me pools of water, to water therewith the wood that bringeth forth trees. I got me servants and maidens, and had servants born in my house. Also I had great possessions of great and small cattle, above all that were in Jerusalem before me. I gathered me also silver and gold, and the peculiar treasure of kings and of the provinces. I gat me men singers and women singers, and the delights of the sons of men as musical instruments, and that of all sorts. So I was great, and increased more than all that was before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me, and whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do. And behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. And I turned myself to behold wisdom, and madness, and folly. For what can the man do that cometh after the king? Even that which hath been already done. Then I saw that wisdom excelleth folly, as far as light excelleth darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walketh in darkness. And I myself perceived also that one event happeneth to them all. Then said I in my heart, as it happeneth to the fool, so it happeneth even to me. And why was I then more wise? What was the point of it all? Then I said in my heart, that this is also vanity. For there is no remembrance of the wise more than of the fool forever. Seeing that which now is, in the days to come, shall all be forgotten. And how dieth the wise man? As the fool. Therefore I hated life, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me. For all is vanity and vexation of spirit. Yea, I hated all my labor which I had taken under the sun, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. And who knoweth whether he shall be a wise man or a fool? Yet shall he have rule over all my labor, wherein I have labored, and wherein I have showed myself wise under the sun. This is also vanity. Therefore I went about to cause my heart to despair of all the labor which I took under the sun. For there is a man whose labor is in wisdom, and in knowledge, and in equity. Yet to a man that hath not labored therein shall he leave it for his portion. This also is vanity and a great evil. For what hath man of all his labor, and of the vexation of his heart, wherein he hath labored under the sun? For all his days are sorrows, and his travail grief. Yea, his heart taketh not rest in the night. This is also vanity. There is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. For who can eat, or who else can hasten hereunto more than I? Finally, for God giveth to a man that is good in his sight wisdom and knowledge and joy. To the sinner he giveth travail to gather and to heap up, that he may give to him that is good before God. This also is vanity and vexation of spirit. So, again, this is Dr. Robert Buchanan, 1802 to 1875, Scottish Presbyterian minister and historian. This is his chapter 2 discourse, or maybe exposition, you might call it, on chapter 2. He says, in the previous chapter, introductory to the exposition of this book, reference was made to its inspired authorship, to the period and circumstances of Solomon's life in which it appears to have been written, and to its main scope and design. We are now, therefore, in some measure prepared to enter on the study of it, and to gather up, under the teaching and guidance of the Holy Spirit, the great lessons which it is so evidently intended to teach. The son of David, king of Jerusalem, is the preacher. whose words we are now invited to hear. And his singularly striking and significant text is this: vanity of vanities, all is vanity. So, before entering on the wide field of beautiful and most felicitous illustration by which the royal preacher expounds and enforces this striking text, it is necessary in the outset to guard from misconstruction in the text itself. It were a great error to regard it as the misanthropic utterance of a jaundiced and disappointed mind, which sees everything through the medium of its own gloomy and distempered spirit, and scowls in sullen discontentment even at those things which are most innocent and good. And it can be misconstrued that way, but that is not the. It was under the influence of no such feelings that Solomon gave expression to the sentiment before us. And if you really read it, you can see that there's read between the lines and the underlying uh, uh, what he's getting at. He had lost none of his sympathies either with nature or with his fellow men, but he had at length learned to know the true place that belonged to them. He had found out this, that in themselves and apart from God, created things are no satisfying portion for the soul, are utterly of imparting solid peace or lasting happiness to man. In this sense considered, they are no better than the shadow which we in vain attempt to grasp. We pursue it eagerly. We try to seize it 1,000 times, but as often the sickening discovery is made that we have taken nothing. Or worse still, in thus setting our affections on the things that are beneath and becoming lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, how often are we made to feel that we have been but gathering the apples of Sodom, beautiful, inviting to the eye as they hung on the forbidden tree, but resolved in the act of seizing them into bitter dust and ashes. It is not, therefore, of created things in themselves and in their own proper place that Solomon means to say that they are all vanity, but it is of these misused and misapplied by ungodly and unspiritual men. And you can see that in that chapter. Understanding then the general statement contained in the second verse, in the sense and under the reservations now explained, let us advance to the argument and the evidence by which it is supported. And he goes in depth. A lot of it I had to leave out, but the ending of this is kind of a summation of everything. So there's like 5 pages that's condensed. So he starts out here with illustrations from the facts of physical nature. The first proposition in proof of the statement that all is vanity, which the preacher lays down, is the somewhat startling one that man has no profit, quote, of all his labor which he taketh under the sun. To illustrate this ceaseless and yet unprofitable toil without Christ, a series of beautiful examples are employed in the verses which follow. First, we are the fluctuations of the human race, which resemble the ebb and flow of the ocean's tides, continually advancing and receding, but never gaining upon the land. Quote, one generation passeth away, and another generation cometh. The earth abideth forever. From the earth, and I'm going to read the whole one of this one. This is on the sun, out of all these physical illustrations. From the earth, the royal preacher next turns his eye upward to the heavens, and there he finds a new example to illustrate the truth he has just proclaimed. Quote, the sun also ariseth, and the sun goeth down, and hasteth to his place where he arose. From the windows of his palace upon Mount Zion, Solomon could catch the first flush of the early dawn as it reddened the eastern sky and marked the very spot on the far-off horizon where the bright orb of the day rose majestically from behind the mountains of Moab, coming forth as a strong man out of his chamber to run a race. What distance, howsoever remote, might not such a traveler hope to reach? As he swept along, he saw the smoke of the morning sacrifice ascending from the courts of the temple at Jerusalem, and already he had traversed the sun, the broad Atlantic, and looked down on the vast primeval forests of the New World, and lighted up the wide expanse of the Pacific Ocean with his beaming countenance before the fires of the evening sacrifice had been yet kindled on the hill of Zion. But where the sun, after all, when the hour at which he rose once more arrives? He is coming up from behind the mountains of Moab again. He has, quote, returned to his place where he arose, unquote, and is only preparing to run the same race anew. And so is it with all the labor that the man who is living without God taketh under the sun. He is traveling in a circle, incessantly toiling on, but never getting beyond the point from which he first set out. Quote, as he came forth of his mother's womb, naked shall he return to go as he came, and shall take nothing of his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. Verse 15, by all the acquisitions of all his labor, he cannot, quote, by any means redeem his brother, nor give to God a ransom for him, that he should still live forever and not see corruption. For he seeth that wise men die, likewise the fool and the brutish person perish and leave their wealth to others. Their inward thought, again, is that their houses shall continue forever, and their dwelling places to all generations. They call their lands after their own names. Nevertheless, being in honor abideth not. He is like the beasts that perish. This their way is their folly. Psalms 49, verses 7 through 13. Okay, we get to the ending here. These illustrations borrowed from the facts of physical nature, he goes on to enforce the great lesson which it is his leading object in this passage to teach by appealing to the still sterner facts of ordinary human life. All things, says he, are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. Every grade of society has its own burden to bear in this toil-worn world. We speak of the working classes as if the only laborers were those who wrought with their hands. But Solomon knew in his day, and thousands know it in ours, that much study, quote, much study is a weariness of the flesh, unquote, that intellectual efforts and mental cares are more exhausting by far than mere bodily toil. Labor is the common lot of man. Look at these pale faces and busy hands in the crowded factory, at these brawny forms sweating around the furnace or the forge, at these thronging multitudes in the city, each intent upon his own errand, hurrying through the streets, the trader engrossed with his customers and his wares, the anxious merchant absorbed in the calculations and pondering the risks of his commerce, the student buried in books, the mother watching, correcting, and fondling by turns her wayward children, and say, if it be not emphatically true, that, quote, all things are full of labor, that, quote, man cannot utter it. And if this survey could be extended so as to include, do we not find the whole earth like one huge hive from which the hum of incessant toil is heard continually to ascend? The whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together until now. Romans 8:22. And yet, after all, the eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. The one cannot rest complacently on the sight, nor the other listen with comfort to the ceaseless sound. The sameness of it wearies both senses alike. Today is just like yesterday, and tomorrow will be just like today. For, continues the preacher, the thing that hath been, it is that which shall be. That which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. We search the most ancient records of history, and what do they tell us of the condition and pursuits of men in those bygone times? They tell us that though they bought and sold, that they planted and builded, that they wronged and oppressed each other, that nation rose up against nation and kingdom against kingdom. very much as we do at the present time. We dig in the shapeless mounds which cover the once regal abodes of Nebuchadnezzar or Nimrod, or we explore the venerable monuments of a still remoter antiquity on the banks of the Nile, and what do we find but fresh confirmations of this saying of Solomon, that there is no new thing under the sun? The very achievements in which our modern world would make her chief boast seem, with few exceptions, to have been all achieved before. Both science and the arts had been so assiduously and successfully cultivated by men whose very names are utterly unknown, and by generations whose memory has altogether perished, that while on the one hand we are forced to exclaim, "Is there anything whereof it may be said, See, this is new, it hath been already of old time, which was before us," so on the other we are compelled to acknowledge the vanity of those labors of the men of other times, seeing that in the very act of discovering them we are reminded of the humbling fact that, quote, "there is no remembrance of former things, neither shall there be any remembrance of things that are to come, with those that shall come after." What a poor thing, then, it is to labor for a merely worldly end. We toil and never make 1 inch of progress towards the happiness we are expending all this effort to reach. We have no real profit, no profit that can pacify an accusing conscience, or purify a sinful heart, or secure the acceptance of a guilty soul with God, in all the labor of that kind that we take under the sun. Such labor resembles the ceaseless coming and going of the successive generations of men, or the apparent course of the sun around the earth, ever returning to the place whence it rose, or the movement of the winds in their appointed circuits, the rivers from the mountains to the sea, and from the sea back to the mountains again. All things, all departments of life are that exhausts itself upon earthly objects and aims, and that ever ends in vanity and vexation of spirit. It may be exciting and satisfying for a time, but it soon grows into a weariness, a dull and joyless round of the same things over and over again. The eye is tired of seeing the unvarying sight, and the ear tired of hearing the unvarying sound. The poor drudge may try at times to persuade himself that he is, at least, surpassing in his own department all who have gone before him, and his pride and perseverance may be stimulated by the thought that his industry, or his science, or his artistic genius, or his literary lore are giving birth to some new thing under the sun, to something that will serve generations to perpetuate his fame. After all, it proves but a repetition of that which has been before, and in no long time both the work and its author are alike forgotten. For as in looking back upon the past, we find, quote, "there is no remembrance of former things," so in looking forward to the future, we may be well assured that neither shall there be any remembrance of things that are to come, with those that shall come after. Men and deeds mightier and more memorable by far in their day than we or our works pretend to be in our own have passed away and left no trace of their existence behind. Have we not then abundant cause to return to the royal preacher's text, and to say of all such labor, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity"? Yes, all labor is and must be unprofitable and vain that is not directed towards the great end of our being, which is to glorify and enjoy God. This, said another royal preacher and one greater than Solomon, quote, "this is the work of God, that ye believe on him whom God hath sent." John 6, verse 29. John 6. When once, through grace, we have done this, then everything else we do will possess a new character. Our worldly business will be prosecuted in a different spirit. The commonest actions of life will take another and a higher aim. Every service will be dignified. Every labor will be lightened by the elevating thought that it is, quote, "done unto the Lord." Let us give heed then to the exhortation, quote, "labor not for the meat that perisheth, but for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give unto you. For him hath God the Father sealed." John 6, verse 27. Say not, quote, "what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or wherewithal shall we be clothed? For after all these things do the nations seek, for your heavenly Father knoweth that ye have need of all these things." But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Matthew 6:31 through 33. Unhappily, the too common course is to reverse this divine order, to seek the world first and to trust that somehow or other the kingdom and the righteousness of God will be gained at a future and more convenient time. To the world, accordingly, men devote their prime and vigor, the prime and vigor of their days. The world's riches and honors, its gaieties and pleasures, its follies and lusts, after these they run with eager steps. And meanwhile, the things that belong to their eternal peace are pushed aside and forgotten. They begin, indeed, before long, to find that they have no profit in all this labor, that it is ever and anon disappointing their fondest hopes, that its very acquisitions prove to be a burden, and its enjoyments a weariness, and that its sweetest thoughts leave a bitterness behind. The feeling that in such a life all is vanity forces itself. As I read this, it was just, wow. You can just see it in the world and in people, and things that you observe in this world going on. The feeling that in such a life all is vanity forces itself with increasing frequency on their minds as they get older. In their inmost heart, they have a growing sense of emptiness, from which, nevertheless, they try no other mode of getting relief than by returning anew to the customary round. They have no other choice. They don't have anywhere else to go, to them. And alas, how many tens of thousands go on thusly to the end? And he's saying, knowing all the while, probably at least in the back of their minds, knowing all the while that there is a more excellent way and a better choice, which nevertheless their increasing worldliness will not suffer them to take. They may have become rich, they may have grown great, worldly wise, they may have gathered around them a wide circle of friends, but a secret whisper tells them that they have been sowing to the flesh, of the flesh to reap corruption. At last, the death hour arrives, the day of grace is over, the acceptable year of the Lord is at an end, and now, when it is too late, they realize the awful truth that they have no profit of all the labor which they have taken under the sun. That's just breathtaking to be there. That in striving to gain the world, they have lost their souls. And we'll end on a better note. Isaiah 55, verse 6. Seek ye the Lord while he may be found. Call ye upon him while he is near. Amen. Next week, we will continue on. In the third point, how soon all the present pleasures of sin will be gone and leave nothing but the sting.
Amen. Thank the Lord. All right, everyone on the line.
Thanks.
It was nice to have you with us during this time, and you're welcome to join us anytime on these Lord days that you want. But until then, go seeking God first and his righteousness in your lives. And Lord willing, we will talk to you again soon.